Now part of the Darkcast Network. Welcome to Indie Podcasts with a dark side. On January 4th, 2023, someone from the real estate firm Tishman Speyer noticed that their employee, Anna Walshe, hadn't shown up for work and hadn't called in. Anna worked as a regional general manager and regularly traveled between Massachusetts and Washington, D.C., so when she failed to appear without any explanation, people started asking questions. As coworkers tried reaching her, concern began to grow. No one seemed to know where Anna was. Eventually, police were contacted for a wellness check, and they began looking into her disappearance. When investigators spoke with Anna's husband, Brian Walshe, he told them that he hadn't seen her since the morning of January 1st. According to Brian, Anna left their Cohasset, Massachusetts home around 6 a.m. because of a work emergency. She'd called a rideshare and headed towards the airport and ultimately Washington, D.C. At that point, there was no reason for investigators to know whether Anna had voluntarily left, experienced some kind of emergency, or if something much more serious had happened. But as police started retracing her movements, they quickly realized there was a problem. Nobody could confirm that Anna had ever made it to D.C. Welcome, lambs. Welcome to a new episode of Love and Murder, Heartbreak to Homicide, your weekly true crime podcast telling you cases of relationships that turn to murder. I am your host, Kai, and in today's episode, I tell you a case about a husband who claimed his wife left for a work trip, only for investigators to discover an orgy of evidence that suggested something far more sinister had happened after she disappeared. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Love and Murder on whatever platform you're currently listening on so you don't miss another case. The best way for you to be able to subscribe so you definitely don't miss an episode is by heading over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Love and Murder, and you can become a free sub over there. However, if you want even more, like no intro, such as this one, no commercials, support the podcast, bonus episodes, the after show, and so much more, then choose one of our paid tiers and become part of the Lamb Fam. This week's upcoming Patreon bonus episode covers a killer who thought he got away with murder. After abducting an 8-year-old girl, he spent years taunting investigators and even threatened other children, all while living quietly in the same community where he committed the crime. So that's this week's upcoming episode, and I do have more bonuses coming out this week. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. So join today to hear that bonus and the piece of evidence that finally brought this 30-year mystery to an end. But now that we got the housekeeping out of the way, let's get back into this case of love and murder. Anna Walshe was born, I'm going to try and say this. This is a Serbian name, so I'm probably going to get it wrong, but I'm going to try and say it, and then I'm going to put the spelling. Anna Ljubicic, I think. So it was Ljubicic, but both C's has like a V on top and then a dash on top. So I don't know how you pronounce that. But she was born on April 12th, 1983 in Belgrade, Serbia. After earning a degree in French language and literature from the University of Belgrade, she immigrated to the United States in 2005. Over the years, she built a successful career in hospitality and real estate, and by February 2022, she was working as a regional general manager for Tishman Speyer. Friends described Anna as a bright light, and I could not find anybody who had anything negative to say about her. Brian Walshe came from a very different background. He was the only child of Thomas Walshe, a prominent Boston neurosurgeon. Although Brian grew up in a wealthy Massachusetts family, his life wasn't without struggles, dealing with depression, anxiety, and anger from a very young age. He attended boarding school, later enrolled at Carnegie Mellon University, and eventually dropped out and checked himself into a psychiatric facility after his mental health deteriorated. In 2008, the couple met while working at the Wheatley Hotel in Lenox, Massachusetts. Anna worked in hospitality, and the relationship eventually grew into something more serious. They married in 2016 and went on to have 3 sons together, 2, 4, and 6 years old at the time that she disappeared. As an adult, Brian became known in Boston social circles as someone who dealt in art, but his relationship with his family remained strained. In fact, by the time his father died in 2018, the two had reportedly gone more than a decade with almost no contact. Their fractured relationship became even more obvious after Thomas died. In his will, Thomas specifically wrote, quote, "I hereby bequeath to Brian R. Walshe my best wishes, but nothing else from my estate." Damn. After Thomas's death, family members accused Brian of destroying the will, convincing a probate court that no will existed, and taking control of the estate. They alleged that he drained bank accounts and sold personal property worth more than $500,000 from the estate. At the same time, Brian was facing legal troubles of his own. In April 2021, he pleaded guilty to federal fraud charges involving a counterfeit Andy Warhol painting. Prosecutors said he sold forged artwork while claiming it was authentic. The case left him facing approximately $400,000 in restitution, which he was ordered to pay. Rather than being sent directly to prison, Brian was placed on a strict home confinement while awaiting sentencing. Even during all of this turmoil, it appeared that they had been building a life together. But by late 2022, cracks in the marriage had become difficult to ignore. Anna's career was thriving. She was earning close to $300,000 a year and spending much of her time in D.C. Meanwhile, Brian was confined to Massachusetts because of his federal fraud case and was facing significant financial pressure. But again, whose fault is that? He could have been, helping, even though his dad left him nothing, he could have been helping his wife at her career, or, finding a career of his own, or he could have just been a stay-at-home dad. Nothing's wrong with that. But instead, you decided to do fraud and forged artwork and all of this stuff. So it's like, whose fault is that? Investigators later found out that Anna had also started a relationship with a man in D.C. named William Fastow. Oh, she was having an affair. Quote, "We quickly became close friends, then confidants, and before long, we started an intimate relationship." William described the relationship as serious and said Anna planned to tell Brian about it. Although they'd kept the affair secret, it appeared that Brian might have known all along. On December 25th, 2022, he searched William's name online. Then 2 days later, on December 27th, he searched for, quote, "best strategies to divorce for a man." Despite the tension in the marriage, the couple still hosted a friend for dinner on December 31st, 2022. The evening appeared normal to the friend, and they left around 1:30 a.m. on January 1st, 2023. According to investigators, that was the last time anyone other than Brian saw Anna alive. The more investigators looked into Anna's disappearance, the less Brian's story made sense. The main problem was there was no one who could verify Brian's version at all. So as investigators began digging into Anna's movements, they learned that she had never even boarded a flight. As they already knew, she failed to show up for work and missed several scheduled commitments. The woman who was known for being reliable and dedicated to her job had suddenly vanished without contacting anyone. Police interviewed Brian multiple times between January 5th and January 8th. During those interviews, he tried to explain why he hadn't reported Anna missing sooner. Quote, "The reason why I didn't call the police sooner is because the week before she was late coming home on December 25th, and I freaked out and called her job and coworkers, and she got embarrassed because she just missed her flight." He also told investigators, quote, "She was looking pale recently and tired and stressed. This is not a normal thing at all." But as investigators continued piecing together the timeline, evidence began pointing them in a very different direction. They learned that while Anna was supposedly traveling for work, internet searches had been conducted on a MacBook and an iPad connected to Brian. Beginning at 4:52 a.m. on January 1st, searches included, quote, best ways to dispose of a body. How long for someone to be missing to inherit? Can you throw away body parts? Hacksaw, best tool to dismember. How long before a body starts to smell? And the searches didn't stop there. Investigators later uncovered additional searches including, quote, is it possible to clean DNA off knife? How to dispose of a cell phone? And more questions about inheritance and life insurance. On January 8th, 2023, Brian was arrested for misleading investigators, and that same day, police searching the family home found a damaged knife in the basement that contained blood. At the same time, surveillance footage was beginning to tell its own story. Investigators obtained video showing Brian shopping at Lowe's and Home Depot on the morning of January 1st, 2023. According to investigators, he purchased approximately $463 worth of items, including cleaning supplies, buckets, mops, a hatchet, and a hacksaw. And if you join the Patreon starting at $3 a month, you do get case extras. So part of the case extras is like pictures of the evidence, if there's video of the interrogation, body cam footage, video of the trial or anything like that. I have that all in the Patreon, and that starts only at $3 a month and above. I will have pictures, like video stills of what he went into Lowe's for and everything like that. So go ahead and check it out in the Patreon, patreon.com/Love and Murder. Video footage also showed Brian visiting multiple dumpsters and disposing of heavy trash bags. One of those dumpsters was located near their apartment complex where his mother, Diana Walshe, lived in Swampscott. So knowing that, what do you think investigators started doing? They went to search the trash containers in that apartment complex, and for added measure, they went to a nearby trash processing facility on January 9th. So they are doing their due diligence. Inside trash bags recovered from those locations, investigators found a hacksaw, a hatchet, a hammer, wire snips, blood-stained rug pieces, blood-stained towels, safety goggles, protective booties, hydrogen peroxide, and a white Tyvek suit. They also recovered personal items belonging to Anna, including her Prada purse, a Gucci necklace, an Hermes watch, her COVID-19 vaccination card, and green boots she had reportedly been wearing before she disappeared. Now, let's go back to the Tyvek suit. First of all, I had to search this up. What is a Tyvek suit? According to A&M Industrial, it's a liquid-tight protective garment that combines comfort and durability with protection against low-concentration, water-based inorganic chemicals and particles down to 1 micron in size. Basically, in layman's term, people use this type of suit with the Tyvek fabric for protection against a bunch of chemical threats and hazards. I'll actually have a picture of one of them in the Patreon for those of you who are more visual like I am. So you could have given me that explanation. I would have been like, huh? So I have a picture in the Patreon as of the case bonuses. So, but if you think of like, if you ever watched Dexter, if you think of Dexter, he made like a homemade type of Tyvek suit. He just wrapped plastic all over him. That's a Tyvek suit. Anyway, forensic testing found DNA from both Anna and Brian on that suit. Anna's DNA was also found on the hacksaw, hatchet, and pieces of the rug. Remember I said in the beginning there was an orgy of evidence? Like, did you hear how much evidence I said they found? On January 17th and 18th, Brian was formally charged in connection with Anna's murder. Then on March 30th, 2023, a grand jury indicted him on charges including first-degree murder, misleading a police investigation, and improper conveyance of a human body. Even though Anna's body had never been found, investigators believed they had assembled a trail of digital evidence, or digital breadcrumbs as they called it, surveillance footage, physical evidence, and forensic tested that pointed directly back to Brian. While this investigation was underway, remember Brian was still dealing with the other legal issue from his counterfeit art fraud case. So in 2024, for that case, he was sentenced to 37 months in federal prison. Then on November 14th, 2025, Judge Diane Frenier ruled that Brian was competent to stand trial for the case of Anna. Just a few days later, on November 18th, and a few days before jury selection began, Brian pleaded guilty to misleading police and improper conveyance of a human body, but he did not plead guilty to murder. That issue would be ultimately left for a jury to decide. So his trial started on December 1st, 2025. From the start, prosecutors argued that this was a calculated murder committed by a man who was under financial pressure, trapped in a failing marriage, and motivated by money. Assistant District Attorney Gregory Connor told jurors that Brian's own digital footprint provided the roadmap for the crime. The prosecution pointed to the internet searches conducted in the early morning hours of January 1st, 2023. They also highlighted the searches done days before Anna disappeared. According to prosecutors, those searches showed planning and premeditation. Attorney Connor presented evidence that Anna's phone stopped communicating altogether on the morning of January 2nd. According to the timeline presented in court, her phone last pinged near the family home at approximately 3 a.m. Evidence presented during the trial showed that Anna held life insurance policies totaling approximately $2.7 million and that Brian was the sole beneficiary. These had gone into effect on May 17, 2021. Jurors also heard testimony that Brian was facing significant financial pressure. Remember, even though he was sentenced to 36 months in prison, he still owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution. Then he was living in a house where the rent was being paid by his mom, and that was about $5,000 a month. I mean, you could have just, downgraded to a smaller apartment. Shudder the thought. So prosecutors said, Exhibit A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that this showed that money was a major motive. The state also presented the evidence recovered from the dumpsters and trash facilities, and with that, they argued that Brian murdered Anna, dismembered her body, and disposed of the evidence. Attorney Connor described Brian's actions as, quote, murdering his wife, dismembering her, and getting rid of her remains by throwing her away like garbage. The defense defensed and presented a very different version of events, as you would expect, because you don't expect the defense to be like, well, Your Honor, we agree with the prosecution. Our client is a piece of trash who murdered his wife. The defense rests. So let's get into what the defense said. Brian's attorneys, Larry Tipton and Kelly Porges, did not deny that Brian disposed of Anna's body. Interesting. Now, the only reason they were able to do that is because Brian pleaded guilty to the lesser charges, so his attorneys were actually able to admit those actions to the jury while focusing the trial entirely on the lack of direct evidence regarding the cause of death and intent for the murder charge. Because when I saw that, they were like, yeah, Your Honor, he disposed of the body. I was like, Mer? And I had to figure out why they would say that. So kind of went into a deep dive there. Anyway, they argued that, yeah, he disposed of her body, but he never murdered her. So what had happened was Attorney Tipton told jurors that Anna had died from what he described as a, quote, sudden and unexplained death. According to Attorney Tipton, what had happened was Anna had died from what he described as a, quote, sudden and unexplainable death. So according to his imagination, I guess, 1 second Anna was standing there just talking, saying, oh, you're such a great husband, you're such a great, and just died. Unexplainable, sudden, and that's what happened. According to the defense, after their friend left the house, Anna went to bed while Brian stayed up cleaning. Later, when he just innocently happened to get into his bed beside his also loving wife, Attorney Tipton said that Brian sensed something was wrong. Quote, You'll hear evidence that when he crawled into bed, he sensed something was wrong. He nudged his wife and she didn't respond, and he nudged her again in a frantic reaction and she rolled off of the bed. Dude, how hard were you nudging her that she rolled off the bed? Nudge? Do you know what a nudge is? Attorney Tipton argued that Brian immediately panicked. Quote, he's now panicking and he doesn't understand what happened and what is happening. You will hear evidence that it was a sudden and unexplainable death. You will hear evidence that it happens. That's literally what he said. End quote. The defense claimed Brian feared nobody would believe him because of his criminal history, which included fraud, not murder, not, beating somebody, just fraud. So with fraud being on your record, immediately if your wife, spouse, partner dies of a heart attack, they're automatically going to be like, he killed her, murderer. Like, what? They argued he was terrified of losing his children and that his actions afterwards were the result of panic rather than murder. Because, when you panic, you think, let me go to Lowe's, buy all of this stuff, dismember a body, get rid of it, plead not guilty. Like, what? Just what? Attorney Tipton repeatedly insisted, quote, Brian Walshe never killed Anna. He never thought about killing Anna. He would never. The defense also tried to explain away the Google searches because, I need an explanation for that one. Quote, why is the man searching now if he had planned to kill his wife? Where's the evidence of premeditation in thousands of pages of records? It doesn't mean that he planned to kill her. It could have just happened in an argument. Have you ever heard of, crime of passion? According to the defense, the searches were the actions of a man desperately trying to figure out what to do after a sudden death. I don't know, most people just called 911. Most people. I'm just spitballing here. Despite presenting that theory, the defense did not call any witnesses to support it, and then Brian chose not to testify. Which, if I remember correctly, didn't the attorney say you will hear evidence to support everything that he was saying? That's what he said in one of his statements. I have the quote here. Jurors also heard from William Fastow, remember the man Anna had been involved with in D.C.? So he testified saying, quote, she had expressed great concern about Brian finding out, and I think she felt it would be a strike against her integrity if he found out in a different way. William also admitted that after Anna disappeared, he thought that maybe Brian had discovered the affair. Quote, I was in an intimate relationship with his wife. I had not heard from her in several days, and frankly, I was concerned that maybe he had found out and was calling to confront me. So, after hearing weeks of testimony, the case was handed over to the jury on December 12th, 2025, and after about 6 hours of deliberation over the span of 2 days, on December 15th, 2025, they found Brian guilty of first-degree murder. Following the verdict, Anna's sister, Alexandra Dmitrijevic, said, quote, justice has been served. 3 days later, on December 18th, 2025, the family returned to court for the sentencing. Alexandra delivered a victim impact statement describing the pain her family had endured since Anna disappeared. Quote, I struggle with the grief that comes without warning, hoping every morning that this is just a terrible dream. The most painful part of this loss is knowing her children must grow up without their mother's hand to hold. They now face a lifetime of milestones, big and small, where her absence will be deeply and painfully felt. Judge Diane Frenier was equally direct. Throughout sentencing, she repeatedly described Brian's actions as, quote, barbaric and incomprehensible. She also condemned what she called his, quote, deceitful and manipulative behavior. Speaking directly to Brian, she said that his sons would never be able to properly grieve because their mother's remains were never recovered. Quote, you had no regard for the lifelong mental harm that your criminal acts inflicted on your then 2, 4, and 6-year-old sons. Mr. Walshe, you will live with the guilt and burden of Anna Walshe's death for the rest of your life. The judge sentenced Brian to life in prison without the possibility of parole for Anna's murder. He also received consecutive sentences of 19 to 25 years for misleading police and 2 to 3 years for improper disposal of a human body. Then she told Brian, quote, "That sentence is immensely appropriate and just, given your murderous acts and the life trauma that you inflicted upon your own children." Even though the trial was over, one thing never changed. Anna was never found. According to attorney Connor, the trial became the closest thing Anna's family ever had to a wake. Quote, "When I looked behind me after the closing arguments, I realized that was the closest day that those people had come to a wake, because they never actually got together to mourn her, and that happened 3 years later." And for her family, that means there will never be a graveside to visit, never a proper goodbye, and never the kind of closure most families hope for after losing someone they love. What they did get was a jury verdict and accountability from the jury, even if it wasn't from Brian. And that was the case of how a man got rid of his wife. We're figuring money was the motive based on all of the evidence, but we never got a confession from him, never any acknowledgement of what he did. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the evidence against Brian was enough to prove murder beyond a reasonable doubt, even without Anna's body ever being found? Or do you think the defense raised reasonable questions about what actually happened inside that home? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And that is all I have for you today. If you'd like even more Love and Murder, head on over to the Patreon for this week's after show. You can get the after shows, you can get case extras starting at the $3 a month tier. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. The episode that's coming after this case covers the case of a foster mother accused of giving away a child. You're not even going to believe how I'm going to finish this sentence. Accused of giving away a child in exchange for a monkey. I mean, I'm telling you, you wouldn't have guessed that in a billion years. I would have offered you a check for $1 million if you can guess how I ended this sentence, and you would have lost every time. But in this case, as investigators dug deeper, they discovered allegations that the bizarre exchange was only a small part of a much darker story that may have been overlooked for far too long. So for that after show and other after shows since I started the after shows, plus backlog of case extras, you can get that if you join the Patreon at the $3 a month tier. If you want bonus episodes, you can join at any other tiers above that. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. And like I said, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. And as I close out every full episode, I want to remind you that it's, say it with me now, all love and no murder, y'all. If you're part of the Lamb Fam, I'll see you in the after show. If not, what are you doing? Join patreon.com/Love and Murder. I'd love to see you over there. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next case. Bye.